According to forensic geologist Scott Walter, the history that we,
and by we he means North Americans,
were all taught growing up is wrong. My name is Dr. M.R. Extenteth, and I'm a conspiracy theory theorist. According to Scott Walter, there's a hidden history in this country.
once again North America, although I guess as we'll see also the UK.
Are you finished? There's a hidden history in this country that nobody knows. There are pyramids here.
Yes, there's quite a lot in sort of Mesoamerica, not exactly hidden.
Chambers, tombs, inscriptions, they're all over this country. Apparently, Scott Walter is going to investigate these artifacts and sites, and he's going to get to the truth. Sometimes apparently history isn't what we've been told.
And now we're going to re-investigate these artifacts and sites, and we're going to get to the truth. Sometimes history as related on reality TV isn't exactly what it seems. The Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, brought to you today by Josh Addison and Dr. M. Dentith. Hello and welcome to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. Oh, nice little cork noise there. I hope the mic's got that, otherwise I'm going to sound quite silly for mentioning it.
Yes, I could just edit the noise out, but also edit you in.
Extra noise in.
That's quite a nice cork noise every so often, just to make it confusing for listeners.
I, appreciator of the cork noise and clearer of the throat, am Josh Addison. Sitting next to me, generator of the cork noise, Dr. M. R.X. Dentith. And this is an episode that's been months in the making.
It has. Actually, I would even say years, truth be told.
Well, I suppose, yeah, if you want to go right back.
Yes, because this week, and only this week, well, I actually tell a lie, we're going to be doing a sequel to this because I'm going to get you to watch other episodes. We're doing a deep dive, and say a deep dive, a shallow dive, because the show itself is quite shallow, into America Unearthed, Scott Walter's vehicle about the real history of the United States of America, although, as we kind of alluded to in the intro, not really.
It does move around a bit, yeah. Yes, no, so, I mean, M has been watching this ever since it began. It's currently
back in the heyday of 2012.
It's now into a fourth season, having been sort of canned a little bit after season 3 and then picked up by another network.
Yeah, there was almost a 5-year period where the show wasn't on the air.
Dark times.
They were the darkest of timelines.
But anyway, so my homework lately has been to watch the episodes of Season 4 of America Unearthed and then report back on my findings, which is what I should be doing now.
Was it hard homework?
Well, it was time that I could have spent doing something else. Let's
Such
put
as?
it like that.
Give me an example of something more productive you would have spent your time on.
Playing computer games.
Such
which
as?
I would have enjoyed more of.
Give me an example of a computer game.
Dauntless. I've been playing a bit of that.
So I was hoping you'd do something like Assassin's Creed Odyssey or Assassin's Creed Origin, which would be so appropriate.
Conspiracy stuff. Yeah, no, I haven't been playing any conspiracy theory themed games at all, I'm afraid.
You have failed me on so many different levels.
Well, what's new? Shall we get into the main episode?
We shall. According to Wikipedia, the TV series America Unearthed is hosted by Minnesota-based forensic geologist Scott Walter, who investigates mysteries and artifacts believed to reveal an alternative history of the North American continent before the United States.
However, according to resident America Unearthed expert Dr. M. R.X. Dentith,
some relation,
the show is a deep dive into claims about how the Knights Templar settled North America. Except it was the Vikings who got there first, possibly the Minoans, and the Freemasons are covering it up. Or they were. Scott Walter is now a Freemason, and seems to say nice things about them, which makes him part of the conspiracy. And there's something about diamonds being a map. Is my nose starting to bleed? I think I can actually feel my brain hemorrhaging.
It's okay, the show is a mess. Such a mess that it went off the air for almost 5 years before being brought back in a form which, well, wasn't quite what I expected.
Which is where I come in, pre my brain bleed. See, I'd never seen an episode of America Unearthed, and so the good doctor bade me watch it, expecting... What did you expect?
I expected something slightly more than what we got. I was also expecting you to come in every week going, what on earth was he talking about? Was you actually mostly came in going, that was quite interesting. I mean, not actually interesting, but quite interesting.
Yes, so possibly a disappointment all round?
Yeah,
Or possibly
until, yeah.
But we'll get to that.
We will indeed, because, there's a whole bunch of weird, mysterious claims going on, suggesting a conspiracy of the highest order when it comes to episode 10.
Yes, no, we didn't really get the mysterious and the weird for 9 out of the 10 episodes, but that last episode, well, shall we get into it?
We shall.
Oh, nice little cork noise there. Yes, so America Unearthed, a show about the secret history of America.
Or at least it was.
Well, presented by a fellow called Scott Walter, who's a forensic geologist. So, A, who is Scott Walter, and B, what is a forensic geologist?
Let me start with what forensic geology is. Forensic geology is an actual thing. For a while I actually thought it wasn't. I thought this was one of those accolades you put behind your name to go, I'm not really an archaeologist, I'm a forensic geologist. But no, it turns out forensic geology is a real thing. It is, according to Wikipedia, the study of evidence relating to minerals, oils, petroleum, and other materials found in the earth used to answer questions raised by the legal system. Forensic geology was important when it came to the aftermath of 9/11, looking through the concrete rubble of the fallen Twin Towers, Building 7, etc., which Scott Walter comes into because he was one of the experts brought in to analyze the concrete post the destruction of the Twin Towers and testified about it in court. So that's why you can be a forensic geologist. You can testify in court about geology and talking about the dating, the history, and how you talk about the composition, what may have gone wrong with the composition leading to a collapse and the like. So it is a real thing, despite the fact that on first glance it does sound ever so slightly suspicious. And then there's Scott Walter. So Scott Walter has a bachelor's degree in geology from the University of Minnesota Duluth. He also claims to have, depending on who you talk to, a master's degree, or at least an honorary master's degree in geology. It was put down on his CV at one point as being an honorary degree. When the University of Minnesota Duluth was questioned about this, they could find no record of ever granting him said honorary degree, at which point Walter clarified that it was in fact a sympathy degree given to him by some of his former professors after he gave a talk where they joked or discussed giving him an honorary degree and presented him with a cup of coffee with whipped cream, claiming that was his new diploma. It's a very suspicious story.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's who he is.
As I have a PhD, I didn't even get hot chocolate.
Ah, well, there we go.
And I believe in miracles since you came along, you sexy thing.
You sexy thing. Okay, so that's who it is. That's the.
Well, he's also the author of several books.
Oh, books, yes.
Let me tell you.
Tell me about his books.
He's written several books on agate, which is a rock, I do believe,
sure is.
And how they're found in the Lake Superior region. So he appears to be a bit of an expert when it comes to both concrete and Lake Superior agate.
And I have to say, in the episodes, he always seems his most confident when he's talking about rocks and stone structures and so on. So that does definitely seem to be.
It's true. He does appear to be in his element when it comes to rocks. He's also the author of books such as The Kensington Runestone, Compelling New Evidence, The Hooked X, Key to Secret History of America, and From Akhenaten to the Founding Fathers, The Mysteries of the Hooked X.
Akhenaten being an ancient Egyptian pharaoh, who
may or may not have been the first monotheist, depending on A, how you define monotheism, and B, exactly how you define what religious belief looked like in Egypt at that particular point in time.
I remember I studied him at university. He was the fun one. He was the one who completely changed sort of the whole of ancient Egyptian society, and then after he died, everyone changed it all back and was like, geez, what was with that guy?
And then erased him from history by
Anyway.
basically removing his name from all the stelae and abandoning the capital that he moved the capital to, which made it quite convenient. He moved it to this place called Tel Al-Mana. It turned out that once he died, he just abandoned that particular complex and it fell into obscurity and disappeared from history.
Anyway, enough Akhenaten, although He is he is a fun topic. He was my favourite bit of ancient Egyptian, I think, actually.
He is one of the only actually interesting pharaohs, which, not to besmirch Egyptology, but the problem with Egyptology as opposed to, say, doing Roman history or ancient Greek history, is that we don't really have much in the way of accounts of the personal lives of the movers and shakers of that society. We have the histories and the steles, while the Greek and the Romans left behind actual papyrus or parchment accounts of their individual lives. So it's much more easier. It's easier to be excited about Julius Caesar because we have his letters. Whilst Akhenaten, you've kind of got the art, some inscriptions, and why did they remove him from history exactly?
Yes. At any rate, back to America Unearthed. So how did you just stumble upon this show? Were you directed towards it as part of your conspiracy theorizing?
As far as I remember, it all started. It started with the Starks in Game of Thrones. No, it started in a drunken state in our friend Nick's living room, where we were talking about pseudo-history and other related things. And either I had seen the name of the show online or Nick had seen the name of the show online. And so we looked into, is this going to be something worth watching? And it turned out it was, and what a delight it was, because from the very first episode of Season 1, Scott Walter is alleging that there is a large-scale academic conspiracy to hide the true history of the United States. And Seasons 1 through 3 basically push that line dramatically, that the American government, academics, and the Freemasons are engaging in a cover-up of America's true history, including claims about manifest destiny and claims about the real Europeans who got to North America first. Now, was that your experience of Season 4?
I cannot honestly say that it was, no. There's very little in the way of actual conspiracy theorizing in the show that I saw. There was a lot of, this is stuff people don't know about, either because it's, sort of too obscure, too hidden, or it's just something people have forgotten about. But there was never really much talk of the fact that it's being actively hidden from the world at large.
Yes, well, it's very disappointing. The Smithsonian gets virtually no room in the episode at all, because often he would claim can't say Smithsonian? Having a day of speech disfluency, which doesn't really help. In the previous series, the Smithsonian is often fingered as being they're the ones who have the real evidence of giants or Phoenician artifacts, and they're keeping them from the public. Virtually doesn't come up at all.
No.
In fact, actually, he's quite glowing towards any academic institution that will have him in this particular season.
There's the one that wouldn't let him take something off and get it tested.
Yes, that was the Francis Drake episode.
Right, yes.
But we'll get into that in just a minute.
Yeah, in fact, let's get into it right now. We'll have a run through. So there are 10 episodes in Season 4, and as we've alluded to, the first 9, or at least 10 is where it gets to the good stuff. So maybe just a quick whistle-stop tour of the preceding 9 episodes. Episode 1 is called Vikings in the Desert. And he looks at these Viking artifacts that are found in the desert in the middle of America and says, is this proof that, obviously these days it's well accepted that Vikings did make it to the east coast of America, founded a small settlement, but didn't last long there and buggered off back to Viking land. But this is right in the middle. So is this evidence that Vikings made it all the way into the center of America, possibly by sailing across the Atlantic Ocean, around Canada, all the way around, through the Arctic Circle, right around the top of North America, right back down the other side, and then up a whole bunch of rivers to end up in the middle of America. The conclusion, basically, they take these artifacts off, they get them looked at by experts and so on, travels off overseas, I think, to get somebody to look at them. And the conclusion is, well, yes, they do seem to be authentic Viking artifacts, but who the hell knows how they got there? Could have got there, someone could have just brought them over and happened to have lost them there. It doesn't actually prove that Vikings took a ship. That was the episode and I do remember this coming up on Twitter when you were occasionally posting your little updates as you watch things. The There's one section, supposedly they were found in the ruins of an old Viking longboat in the middle of the desert. And they go through property records and so on and figure out where it was originally reported to have been, work out where that land is now, work out who owns that land now, go to the owner of the land and say, hey, we think there could be something buried under here. Do you mind if we do a bit of digging? And the guy says, okay. They go in with I can't remember what it was. Was it a metal detector or a seismic thingamajigger? They find something down there and go, oh, look, there could be some important historical artifacts buried down there. Bring in the backhoe. And they just start...
A giant backhoe, which digs into the ground with absolutely no finesse.
Yes, and fortunately it turned out there was not an ancient Viking ship under there. It was...
In fact, it turns out that probably what set off the detector was both a bar of iron in the ground and overhead power lines.
Anyway, so that's episode 1. Episode 2 was all about alien artifacts.
Yeah, and this is what I call the you're not a credulous git Mr. Pepperdine episode. That's a reference to Fry and Laurie there. And that this is the episode that shows that Scott Walter isn't a credulous fool.
Well, yes, he starts off with a guy brings him some tablets that are inscribed with alienish looking things, and they appear to be very, very old. And so he has a look around a bunch of related things. He goes to a cave in Peru where there are all these carvings that appear to show extraterrestrials and spacemen and chariots of the gods type stuff. And so he looks at them and straight away says, "Oh, sorry guys, these are fake. The inscription, the etchings, the lines are much too recent. These aren't ancient carvings. They've just been made more recently." So
it is interesting though that he doesn't claim that the people who took him to the cave engaged in the faking.
No.
Which, I don't know about you, but that all kind of smelt like a setup in both directions. Can we find some people who are producing fake artifacts for Scott to go and look at and say they're fake, but also ensure that they appear on camera by not accusing them of doing the faking, even though they're the most likely suspect?
Yes. So on the other hand, possibly you're in the middle of the jungle in Peru, surrounded by locals and maybe a small camera crew of your own. Maybe you don't want to piss these people off by accusing them of being fraudsters to their face.
That's true.
In a location where you could probably disappear permanently. And so the conclusion there, the artifacts that kicked it off, it's all just a little bit airy-fairy, and he reckons he got the artifacts tested and they appear to be impossibly old. They appear to be thousands too old.
The glue apparently is impossibly old. There's no way you could fake having organic matter that old in glue. Ipso facto, the glue that's binding things to the artifact indicates they are incredibly ancient. And as several archaeologists online said after that episode, it's quite easy to get old organic matter to then put into glue so that glue appears to be old when you test it. You just dig a really, really deep hole in an area where you know human habitation has been for a long time. You dig up organic matter from beneath the ground. You make your glue paste from that organic matter, and when it's dated, the glue will look old. It's not impossible.
No, but I mean, he stops short of saying, "Well, here's proof of alien life right here," but he just sort of leaves it on a bit of a question mark. Really, these things look to be impossibly old.
It is very much chariots of the gods, as you said.
Now, episode 3, The Cave of Secrets. Now, I found this episode genuinely interesting, but it's not for its earth-shattering history.
In fact, it doesn't actually say anything new about history, does it?
No, it doesn't at all. Basically, this fella in Pennsylvania says, "Hey, I've got this cave on my property, which I stumbled upon when I was a lad, and it has mysterious carvings and markings and stuff inside it. Do you want to come check it out?" So he has a look at this cave.
Which is now flooded.
Unfortunately, is now flooded, yep, but he sends in a little drone submersible thing and then sends in some actual cave divers, and has a bunch of fun poking around there and finds a bunch of carvings and some things down there. And it's in one bit that did appear quite staged. They sort of they hit a dead end. They can't investigate anymore into the cave because of the flooding. And then the guy who invited him says, "Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention the other day, I also found this badge around the same time in that area when I first discovered the thing, and it's the badge of some sort of quasi-Masonic order." And they look through the records and find out that the leader of that order was the former owner of the house. So it appears that cave had been used in the rituals of this sort of Mason-ish secret society that was in the area at the time.
Which then somehow goes into the Underground Railway.
Well, yes, again, so they've taken that story as far as they can, and then they're like, but he keeps coming back to these initials that appear to have been carved in the walls, and they can't find anyone involved in that secret society that had those initials, so maybe who else, what could have been, and where they are in Pennsylvania is where the Underground Railroad went through. It makes it sound like it's an actual railroad, but and so basically they do a bunch of investigating. So it's entirely possible that this cave could have been used to shelter runaway slaves who were being taken to free states as part of the Underground Railroad, and he goes and finds the descendant of a freed slave who wrote a sort of chronicle of people who went through the Underground Railroad, who now, his descendant is now a historian, and they sort of get to see his original diaries. It's quite an emotional moment for her, and in all in all, it was an interesting bit of American history, but not a particularly secret or controversial or conspiratorial history.
No, which then becomes quite interesting when we go to episode 4, which is Unmasking Jack the Ripper, the notorious serial killer who operated in London, which is, I believe, located in a country called the United Kingdom of not the United States of America.
Yes, so...
Not so much America Unearthed as in we have to do a Jack the Ripper episode now.
I mean, to be fair, he's investigating the pet theory of a bunch of American guys, so it kind of starts in America. But yes, it's entirely about stuff.
It's not about the hidden history of America.
It's not about the hidden history of
form.
America at all. So, I mean, the theory they're going in, obviously, is there anyone in that time period who hasn't been accused of being Jack the Ripper by now?
One of my ancestors hasn't been accused, but
it's a shame.
Only one. All the others
must
have
be
been.
an oversight.
Yeah.
So in this particular case, their theory is that Jack the Ripper was actually famous author Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes. And what else did he write? Was Sherlock Holmes his only thing?
So he also wrote the Professor Challenger stories, which so The Lost World is a Professor Challenger story. He was also fairly famous at the time for writing historical romances, which in that sense is about knights doing daring deeds. But they basically haven't survived because they weren't very well written. They were kind of overwritten. Whilst it turned out his more pulpy fiction he wrote for The Strand, like the Sherlock Holmes stories and the Professor Challenger stories, were written in a kind of pulpy, fast-paced manner. And those stories turn out to have stood the test of history. Whilst the stuff he actually thought was important turns out not to have done. At least when it comes to fiction. There's also the whole Cottingling fairies thing, which he was involved in, but that's another matter entirely.
Story entirely. Yes, so I mean, Arthur Conan Doyle was a Freemason, and so they get to talk about Masons a lot and Masonic rituals and all that sort of stuff, and he was a trained doctor as well.
He was, yes.
And so then Scott Walters chopping up a
fake cadaver as opposed to an actual cadaver. Yeah. Okay, so here I am emulating the Ripper murders by actually chopping up a human being to see how hard it would be. So that's the budget.
So he does get to disembowel a practice cadaver. Unfortunately, it's a male one. So when he's like, because there's some of the victims like had their ovaries removed and what have you, and he's like, well, this is more or less where ovaries about are. So if this were a woman, this would be anyway. And in the end, as is becoming something of a theme, it ends up fairly inconclusive. They don't prove that Arthur Conan Doyle was the Jack the Ripper, but I guess they don't prove that he wasn't.
No, but it does have the best line in the entire series, and we're going to play you a clip of that right now.
If he was the Ripper, in his mind he was done, so he checked out of Masonry and checked into murder.
No, it doesn't actually get better than that, does it?
No, it really doesn't. I mean, that's basically the pinnacle the show is ever going to hit.
Anyway, so we move on. Episode 5, Phoenicians in America, which is kind of like the Vikings in America one. Again, they found some artifacts that appear to be Phoenician artifacts in the middle of America. Does this mean that the Phoenicians managed to get all the way across to America? So he looks into this theory, and a large part of it seems to be based on an ancient map from the time period that has these little islands off the coast of Africa, and some people for some reason think that those aren't actually islands off the coast of Africa.
They're islands. Canary Islands, I believe.
I think people think they're Canaries, but then they're like, some people suggest maybe they're actually these islands on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean.
In the Caribbean.
It's just because the cartographer has no sense of scale that looks like they're right next to Africa. And
ignoring the fact there are some islands off the coast of Africa that these islands would actually match quite closely.
So, yeah, there's a look into that. I understand... He meant the Minoans come up. I understand.
Yeah, so back in season
seasons.
1, he does an episode about how he thinks that the bronze that the Minoans based their civilization upon comes from North America.
Right.
Because there's this rather errant claim that the amount of bronze attributed to the Minoans can't be sourced from the Mediterranean. It turns out that that's probably not correct. It's probably also more likely that they sourced their bronze from the Mediterranean than found North America.
Yeah.
And then engaged in a very elaborate sea trade of bringing bronze all the way back to Crete.
Now, I have to admit, I can't even remember how this episode finished. That's how little an impact it had on me. Was this the one where it turned out the artifacts weren't genuine?
Yes, that's the one
I remembered there was one.
where the grandmother may have been mistaken about the Phoenician nature of the lettering on the artifacts in question, because linguists went, yeah, that's not Phoenician. Right. But Scott still finds evidence that maybe the Phoenicians were in America, just not with that evidence.
Now, episode 6, The Spy Who Saved America.
Once again, not actually hidden history, just more historical question of... It's not... There are no lies, there's no misinformation. It's a case of we don't know who a certain member of the Culper spy ring was. And this episode is an investigation to 3 candidates who may have been the mysterious Culper spy ring.
Probably was fairly spry.
Spy ring member operating outside of New York.
But he does it with Valerie Plame, which is a name you probably remember.
Yeah.
She was she got booted out, didn't she? She had to resign. What was the deal with her again? Because they didn't go into her. They sort of say, hey, you've heard her name, but they didn't quite go into the.
So she, from memory, is involved in the whole enhanced interrogation thing and the exposure of what was happening under George W. Bush's regime in the US, and kind of got ostracized by the intelligence community from memory. I'm actually going from memory on this. So basically was the fall person for that particular story. And yes, they don't mention that at all. No. They just mention that she's an expert when it comes to spies because she's a former spy.
Yep. And so basically there's this one spy who goes by the identity of 355 who was a woman and one of George Washington's sort of trusted spies during the Revolutionary War. And yeah, I mean, there are 3 women who they think sort of fit the bill, and they narrow it down to one, largely based around the fact that the other 2 weren't anywhere near New York when the spy was supposed to be in New York, so I'm not sure. And yeah, I mean, again, it's an interesting bit of history. It's not controversial or conspiratorial. I mean, the story itself is conspiratorial. It's all about spies and the Revolutionary War and passing information and so on, but at the end of the day, here's a person we don't quite know who their identity was, and they come up with a good candidate for her identity.
Now, actually, I'm completely wrong about the enhanced interrogation thing. It's the Scooter Libby. What's called Planegate. So yes, it was a case of information being leaked and things like that, and basically she was the source.
There you go. Anyway, on to episode 7, Bigfoot of the Bayou. So we go to some actual Bigfoot hunting. There's a Sasquatch type. Do you pronounce it cryptid? I've heard people say it in different, like,
I say cryptid because I call it cryptozoology, so cryptid. That's
what I'm sure I've heard people pronounce it weirdly. But anyway, I'm going to say cryptid as well. Sasquatch type cryptid in the bayous of Louisiana. And he basically goes on a Bigfoot hunt. He gets out his night vision cameras and stakes things out, and this is done for network television, so it has commercial breaks, which always, they always manage to have something dramatic happen beforehand. So he's like in the bush, and then it's like, what was that? Cut to commercial, come back.
Suggesting heavily he's about to be attacked by Sasquatch.
And cuts back to, I guess it was nothing.
No, it wasn't nothing. It was gas.
Well, yes. In the end, it's one of the things that marks the Sasquatch-type creature everybody talks about is that supposedly it has a terrible smell, and this bad smell is sort of a sign that the creature is nearby. And so again, in the him not being entirely credulous thing, he does actually debunk part of this thing by saying, actually, that thing you can smell, that's swamp gas being released by the decomposing vegetation.
But as becomes standard throughout the season, he goes back to talk to the person who sent him on his quest in the first place and says, well, I mean, it might be swamp gas, but I do think that maybe your ancestors saw something or experienced something after all that can't be explained. So he does try to have it both ways. He does a little bit of gentle debunking and then goes, but it still might be true.
Anyway, moving along, let's rattle through the last few. Episode 8, Drake's Lost Treasure. They go looking for Sir Francis Drake's Lost Treasure. Spoiler, they don't find it.
When Drake's fleet returned to the UK, there was a kind of a sum of money missing. It's suspected that maybe it was buried somewhere along the coast of North America. They go looking for it, looking at what appears to be new map evidence. They don't become rich.
Yes, and so that's the one where there's he says to university, hey, can I please take this old thing and get it properly tested? And the university's like, no.
Yeah.
And so the end.
Which he then goes, they don't want me to test to see whether this is real, because the suspicion is the artifact in question is a fake. Whilst it's probably more likely that they're going, well, we don't know who you are.
Just give stuff out to randoms. Yeah.
We'll do it professionally or not at all, not just give it to a reality TV host who will probably shine lasers at it.
Oh, nice little cork noise there. So episode 9, Chicago's Mystery Bomber is yet another interesting historical footnote episode, basically. They try to identify the person behind the Chicago Haymarket attack of 1886, which is sort of the first sort of bombing attack in American history. Some dude chucked a bomb into a gatherer. It was like a labor, not riot, but it's a labor movement thing. Threw an explosion into the middle of the crowd, killed a bunch of people, and it's never been proven exactly who the bomber was.
Yeah, so there's a suspicion that it might have been a unionist, or it might have been a member of the police, or the security forces attached to the state at the time, who was trying to antagonize the issue. Interestingly enough, he goes and talks to the Pinkertons, who were operating on the side of the local government at the time, and they say, no, it definitely wasn't us. And Scott Walter goes, well, if they say no, it can't have been them. Despite the fact that Pinkertons have a fairly salubrious history of being agitators and then denying it after the fact, and in the history books going, no, actually, you are kind of on the side of the bad guys there.
So he gets to have a bit of fun. He goes old school and makes one of these old-fashioned hanger. He goes to a I don't know what he is, a metallurgist or an ironmonger of some sort who forges one of these. It's like sort of a little sphere of lead with that you pack explosives inside.
Kind of like a petard.
It is a little bit, yes, with a fuse, and then you throw it, and then many people are hoist upon it.
Indeed.
Or hoist by it.
Scott Walter was almost hoisted by his own petard, you're saying?
Well, he pretty well.
He could have been.
He could have been if he'd been standing a bit closer.
Or if the fuse had been wrong.
And so again, much as with the Valerie Plame episode, they find a guy who fits the bill, could well be the dude. Interesting historical footnote, not particularly conspiratorial or mysterious.
No.
But then we get to episode 10, Exodus of the Templars.
Now this was what I was waiting for.
Yeah, this is the one
Josh,
you wanted me to
tell
see.
me what happened in episode 10.
Right, well, it starts with some dude's found an inscription on a rock in Newfoundland and gets Scott Walter to investigate, and he looks at this and says this could be more evidence for his pet theory that the Knights Templar, after getting booted out of England, sailed to the new land.
Not England, Europe.
out of Europe, out of everywhere, out of the old world. Well, they ended up in Scotland, didn't they? Or is that what he claimed?
Right.
At any rate, got booted out of the old world, came to the new world with all their riches and treasures and mysterious artifacts. He claims they possibly had the Holy Grail, they possibly had the Ark of the Covenant, they possibly had documentary proof of secrets that the church doesn't want you to know, including the existence of Jesus's children.
Well, the old bloodline, eh?
And so I understand this has been the overriding, the common thread throughout the previous 3 seasons.
Now, before we go into exactly what this is meant to mean, did this episode make any sense to you at all?
I could understand the claims he was making, couldn't really get a handle on how the things he was looking at provided evidence for those claims. In particular, so he has this inscription. It has was it an actual hooked X, or there was another symbol on it that he thought that was a Templari sort of a symbol. He does his whole geologist thing. At first, he looks at it and says, "Oh, actually, I think that I think this might not be legit because that doesn't look nearly weathered enough to be old enough." But then he goes and inspects it with his microscope, which appeared to be a special lens stuck on the end of a cell phone camera, but and says, and then is surprised to see the rock is actually a lot, the kind of rock is a lot harder than he thought it was, which means you wouldn't expect to see nearly as much weathering, so it could be legit, and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, then he goes to Scotland. And there's a castle in Scotland where apparently the Templars were, and there's a carving on the wall.
A chapel.
A chapel, an old stone building. That's a castle in my books. And there's inscriptions on the wall, including this one that has sort of 4 diamond shapes on top of each other with another little symbol below, and then a sort of a 5-pointy sort of pentagrammy star, which he claims is a treasure map. And that's where I was like, hang on, what? He claims that these diamond shapes are coordinates. Each one is a coordinate. I think
actually,
it was...
they're latitudes.
I think it was... Because he did talk about earlier, the Knights Templar supposedly had a thing where they'd stake out a square and sort of run twine around it, and then at a certain time of day they'd see that the square would cast a diamond-shaped shadow. Was that where the diamonds came into it? That was the only other time I remembered him talking about
the whole
that.
diamond thing. I had to watch it several times, and I still didn't quite grasp exactly what his argument was meant to be. But they're meant to be latitudes, indicating stops that the Templar fleet made on their way to Newfoundland in North America.
They just look like a bunch of diamonds, and they're sort of carved into a wall. So if it was like, you'd need to get really precise with your angles, surely, if you were doing something. Anyway, that's his thing. Then he goes and talks at this tower in Newport, and I understand back in America, this has come up a bunch of times.
Yep, he's absolutely obsessed with what appears to be the remains of a grain mill, which he claims to be Templar architecture of some kind.
Yes, I mean, he
so makes... that it doesn't in any way resemble Templar architecture in the old world.
He makes a great sort of mention of the fact that there's like an archway and the cornerstone is not in the centre where a cornerstone would normally be, it's off to the side, and so therefore that's supposedly highly significant, and there's a window in it that the sun shines through at a right time, possibly Venus, I can't remember, Venus comes up a few times as well. So he certainly appears to believe that the treasure of the Templars is buried underneath this tower, but because...
they won't let him dig.
Well, and as he himself says, it would be quite an undertaking to not destroy the tower at the same time as you're digging underneath it. So again, there's a bit of a sigh. One day maybe we'll get into this. He gets his pet archaeologist too, doesn't he? This dude who used to be a baseball player and is now an archaeologist. So he was a little bit famous beforehand or something.
Yeah, so he's appeared in previous seasons as well.
And yeah, I mean, there was a lot of. There's a lot of stuff where I was just like, hang on, what? His thesis seemed clear enough. The Templars came here, they brought their stuff, there are symbols that you can trace their route, but any time he tried to show actual proof of this, my brains did start dribbling out my ears a little bit. I particularly like the bit, though, he looks at one inscription. I can't remember if it's a Newfoundland one or a different one. And he's like, now, you've got this picture, talking to the guy he's with, and they've sort of got a scan of it on the computer. Now, can you measure the width of the top line? And the guy measures it to be exactly 46.6 centimetres, and he writes this down in his notepad. And now, can you measure the length of the bottom line of text? And he measured it out, and it's exactly 23.3 centimetres. He writes down 23.3, and he's like, 46.6, 23.3, why that's a ratio of exactly 2 to 1. And I did notice, though, that when he draws the line identifying that it's like from the top left of one to just a little bit below the top right of the other side, just to make sure the line extends to exactly 46.6 and exactly 23.3. And then apparently that was ridiculously significant because the Templars and the Masons and everybody else was all about their 2 to 1 ratio in their architecture, although that was like that have rooms where the width to height ratio was 2 to 1, not inscriptions where one line happened to be twice as long as the other.
Also, you have to imagine the poor person who manages to get the ratios on the inscriptions completely wrong. No, we have to throw this entire stone out now. Start again. We have to pull the entire stone out of the wall. Bloody hell.
So, yeah, I admit I did kind of get lost. So you've watched it yourself as well. Does it make more sense having seen the previous ones?
Yes, because it is very much a sequel to previous Templar episodes you've seen on America Unearthed. So traditionally, Scott Wolter spends 2 episodes per season looking at his pet theory about the Templars coming to North America after their expulsion from Europe. And it's quite clear that this was meant to be a 2-part episode that was cut into one commercial hour.
It does jump around a lot.
Yeah, it does feel like there's a lot of stuff missing there, so they had to compress things into 1 hour, because obviously the channel went, we're not giving you 2 hours on Templars. We know you want to do an episode, but you're doing an episode, not a 2-parter, not a movie-length special, just a normal episode. And so he is revisiting a lot of material he's looked at in the past. Now, Wolter's thesis about the Templars coming to America is an incredibly convoluted story. It involves this thing called the Kensington Runestone, which is supposedly a Viking inscription, which appears to be narrating a travelogue, which Wolter claims is actually a land claim, which has a unique feature called the Hook X, which is something only the Templars apparently use, which indicates the Vikings and Templars are somehow related, and that apparently when the Viking Order, the Knights Templar, was shut down by the church and the French aristocracy, apparently they all just had to disappear elsewhere, as opposed to what actually happened, which is that most of the members of the Knights Templar outside of the leadership who were tried ended up just going to different orders all around Europe. And in fact, actually, some branches of the Knights Templar weren't suppressed. They actually continued to exist for years afterwards. So his actual understanding of what happened to the Knights Templar is so ahistorical, it's kind of unbelievable. But no, he's got this really big thing that the Templars made it to North America and established colonies, land claims, and bloodlines there to hide the real treasure of the Knights Templar, the children of Jesus Christ.
Which they only get mentioned in passing in that episode, I have to say.
Yes, and that's in part because I think they've snuck an episode in which has the most palatable version of his Knights Templar story, knowing that long-term fans who have watched seasons 1, 2, and 3 will have seen the previous storylines and know exactly what he's hinting towards.
Well, there you go. So, general impressions. I was surprised at the production values. It's very slick, very, sort of nicely shot, good CGI, reconstructions, reenactments, yes, with the costumes and everything. But yes, the whole thing just seemed a little bit tepid. Things are either inconclusive or interesting, but not in any way going to upend all of history as we know it. And And then, yes, then the last one was just a little bit weird.
Yes. And the thing was, I was kind of hoping for old-style America Unearthed, which is chock-a-block with conspiracies, pseudo-history, alternative takes on the prehistory of North America. And what we got this time was basically half and half of maybe Vikings and Phoenicians got here, or maybe they didn't. And here are some unanswered questions about American history. Wouldn't it be fascinating to go on a field trip and throw some bombs around to see whether we can work out the answers? And that stuff was particularly tepid because the show starts off telling us history we've taught has been wrong. There are pyramids, artifacts, inscriptions. And half the storylines isn't about the history that we've been told is wrong. It's
questions that haven't quite been answered.
There are some questions
yet.
about history which we're not sure about. Let's investigate it.
Yeah. So
the promise of the show is not fulfilled by the show itself.
So I understand we're now going to have a sequel to this episode where you furnish me with episodes from previous seasons.
We
and
are,
see what I think
yes.
of those. So that'll be coming up later once I've recovered.
Well, I mean, given there are at least 30 more episodes for you to watch, I imagine we'll be doing that in about 30 weeks.
Indeed. So I think we've come to the end of the episode. Which means we are now going to stop recording and then start recording again some bonus patron content for our patron bonus patrons.
The bonus patrons bonus.
If you would like to become one of our patrons, that would be just super and peachy keen. And you can do so at patreon.com or at conspiracism.podbean.com. Or you could just not and just continue listening to these main episodes, and that's fine as well.
It is fine. I mean, it does make you inferior compared to our patrons, but our patrons are truly superior human beings, and also alien shape-shifting reptiles, and 2 sentient dogs from Alpha Centauri, but we shouldn't get into that.
The less said, the better.
Yeah.
Yes. To our non-patron listeners, we'll see you next week. To our patron listeners, we'll see you in a minute, assuming that you stop listening to this episode and immediately do the bonus episode, which you might. I don't know. I'm not your mum. You listen to things whenever you want.
I mean,
we'll see you then anyway.
may already listen to the bonus episode.
Yeah, you could be some sort of weird, sick in the head lunatic who likes to listen to the bonus content and then the main episode.
But you do you.
Yep. It's a free world.
It is.
So until
unfortunately,
one day we'll do something about that. But until that day, we will say to you goodbye. And nice little cork noise there. Tune in next time.
Well, arrivederci. You've been listening to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, starring Josh Addison and Dr. M.R.X. Denton, which is written, researched, recorded, and produced by Josh and M. You can support the podcast by becoming a patron via its Podbean or Patreon campaigns. And if you need to get in contact with either Josh or M, you can email them at podcastconspiracy@gmail.com or check their Twitter accounts, Monkey Fluids and Conspiracism. And remember, Soylent Green is meeples.
What the hell am I caught on? There we go.
Cabling!
The cabling.
It's like Boomcat's The Reckoning. Okay, I kicked some ass, and then I tripped over the cables, and everything went everywhere, and it was embarrassing. And then we became the theme tune to Bird of Prey, or Birds of Prey. One of the early DC attempts to do a TV series. I actually never watched it.
No, it was kind of...
There was Gail Simone was writing that?
I don't know.
I think she was, yeah.
Anyway, nice little cork noise there.